taking time off just to refine my perspectives and, develop my content. So I'm not just out here spewing garbage of what you've already heard. But at the same time, I want to take my time to touch on important topics. Topics that catch my interest as well. And topics I could also learn from. One of such topics is marriage and the theme of relationships. Because everyone seems to be engaged in one, caught up in one, trying to get out of one. I've been born in this particular time and space, this generation. And also considering the past, especially us who have the knowledge of, tradition and culture. Envisaging where we are, compared to the future is a quite scary reality. The yardstick, often used to measure, this failure in relationships is divorce. Divorce, normally being a negative outcome of marriage, a union between two people. Everyone tries to bring up different ideas or solutions as to why marriages, are failing at an alarming rate. One thing I think a lot of people miss is, the blueprint of union for the purpose of procreation, not for, pleasure, not for selfish agendas, but for procreation. And one of the best ways, to understand that is culture and tradition, knowledge from the past. Well, that knowledge is contained in different forms. And one of such popular forms is, religion. The idea of union for the purpose of procreation. Ideally defined, by the institutions of religion. And I would lend, these institutions as having sort of the best formulas or templates for marriage. Especially when done without any agenda or, manipulation, but just raw formula for guiding, a man and a woman coming together for the purpose of family. Why I think the fate of marriage in the future is worse is because of a loss in the ability of the generation to appreciate God. Not God in a, spacey sense, but God in a way where you, have sort of a perfect manual for life. From a father who has developed the best ways, ideal philosophies, ideal traits, characters, and is able to pass them down. This is what is missing, and the ability to reinforce, those habits and qualities that preserve the institution of marriage. Again, one of it was religion or is religion. Another is culture, your tradition, and ultimately your biology, preservation of biological principles. These are my basis for that prediction, and it's a natural thing. I feel that as we move further away from the beginning of time, when purpose was a strong question and an answer in itself, to now when it's still a question, but there are too many, I'd say pseudo answers that we used to make up for, our lack of absolute knowledge. And with the drive for independence, the drive for freedom, the rise in this liberal wave, there's a reality that is forming, and that reality is anti-institution. Whatever the institution is anti-institution. So the reality becomes, a battle between these institutions and the movements that are anti-systems. And if you adopt any of these monotheistic religions, for example, Christianity, there's something that says, the kingdom suffers violence, the violent take it by force. And it's oftentimes, the kingdom representing marriage, the union, and how that union suffers violence from the outside world. So you have, say, marriages in today's world, people who still, nurse belief in the institution of marriage come together. They have to deal with the realities that come with, merging different lives in a world that isn't really favorable to that. And then you have this issue of a lack of community that encourages family. Everyone is busy in this capitalist reality, trying to make money and, get by. So having people who have, vested, mutual interest in that collective growth is something I believe is really missing in an age where, independent living and autonomy is promoted. That being said, you have a system that is threatened by changes in the outside reality, which, many of us aren't prepared for. In the times of my, father, for example, early 90s, mid 90s, the conversation of, sexuality was still very conservative. And, Nigeria, where I come from, it was frowned upon. Spiritual circles looked at it as an abomination, homosexuality. But that helped to preserve, the biological, spiritual essence, of the different genders. And sort of still had an influence on regulation of union. But again, in a liberal system where ideas are, given zero limits, there's bound to be conflict. Because life is really a game of mind. And the mind is where the battle really lies. We talk about human beings, but a human being is not just a man, woman, boy, girl. It's a mind. The biological, I'd say, destiny of the human being is manifestation of consciousness in a way that advances, the individual and the collective. And if that's not being achieved, then there is a problem. So we're going back to marriage now, my point on homosexuality. Parents come together, have a child, and, have the natural challenge of bringing up a child. The cost, the health realities. And then you go past that and then you're dealing with social realities, that are beyond your control. you hear about people sending kids to school, and this kids are being groomed and being exposed to sex at an age where, their brains and, mental faculties aren't really ready to comprehend it. A lot of them are given knowledge without awareness of the responsibility, of being a custodian of that knowledge. And so it's natural people abuse it. And in religious parlance, when you hear of the apple, and you hear of like its allusion to knowledge, the real challenge the divine in the story of the garden had was, not really eating the apple or trying to attain knowledge, but it's trying to attain knowledge without the responsibility for knowledge, the approval of the custodian of that knowledge before accessing such knowledge. And so what you have is someone who wields power without the capacity to handle or manage power. And that's what I say in the conversation of marriage and the institution, and what the institution is, created to achieve. It's meant to be a powerhouse of life. Yeah. And the quality of marriage, the quality of union, determines the quality of lives that are produced into this, into this world. And different people aspire for marriage, and people call very, weird unions marriage, but you can have different types of partnerships. You can have different types of union. You can have different types of relationships, situationships, friendships. But marriage as a term, as an institution that fulfills that that fulfills that undeniably quintessential purpose of biology, being procreation, must be preserved. The institution must be informed by its purpose. In legal parlance, the purposive approach would be the ideal sort of, defining framework for how marriage should be, managed in our time. But if that isn't done, if expectations aren't, managed properly through education, because I'll be honest with you, besides my own, personal venture into the dating market, I wasn't really thought about by anybody. Like, my father didn't sit me down to teach me how to talk to this, talk to that, or like the older I grew, like being the first child and having younger ones, like I made them a point to expose them to that reality of, the opposite sex. And they need to understand the opposite sex. Like, when it comes to the knowledge of marriage, I was born in a home where I had my father and mother, so I'd say I had a more practical exposure to what marriage is. So I personally wouldn't need somebody to sit me down and, give me academic lesson on marriage. It's a lived experience for me, because I was lucky enough to have parents who understood, marriage not from a superficial level, but from a very, deep spiritual level. But a lot of people don't have this guidance or this knowledge, so again, trying to go into anything without properly being equipped is almost a short failure. So I'd say the future is to, create an awareness and sensitization of, the failure of modern society to preserve, the pillars of the institution of marriage and other, ancillary institutions necessary to foster qualities or factors that promote, marriage as an institution, encourage, the nuclear family, the sense of family, the protection of family, and, the pedestalization of family. Because in the end, family is the core unit of society. Until humans find an alternative source for birthing or, procreation, it still takes a man and woman, a sperm and an egg, the male and the female essence, to bring about the very essence we call the being, the human being. I encourage anyone who is looking to get married to understand, marriage is a very risky business, especially when you're doing it on, the high of romance or love. It takes a certain level of spirituality and genuine selflessness to really, successfully commit to that. And I encourage anyone who does real introspection and feels like, you're not ready. Like, there are other forms of partnerships you can get into, like other relationships you could get into. Because oftentimes you meet people at different times of life, and like some people just genuinely not mentally, spiritually, psychologically ready for that marriage commitment. It's nice. It's a beautiful title to be married, Mr. or Mrs. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, but the beauty is just surface level. The depth comes from the depth of life that comes from true sacrifice between two people that have genuine, commitment to each other. And oftentimes that commitment doesn't just come from, feelings. It comes from principle and a core respect of the inner essence. Some people might define it as core respect for God, yeah, but a core respect for the divine law that guides, the sperm through the penis, or the journey through, the vagina to the egg, and the evolution into a being who has the potential to become whatever, That's a very spiritual thing. I'd say repetition and the statistics might make us become numb to that beautiful process, called birth, and the preceding reality that comes before birth. Because the failure to honor that preceding reality, influences negatively the odds of the birth itself becoming something that evolves to become a source of positivity in a world where, depression hangs wide,